Do you still have Johnstown Airport in sight?
Nashville, I'm declaring an emergency. My engines are down.
Charlie, Foxtrot, Bravo, Whiskey Hotel. Are you trying to land at Johnstown?
My engine turned off. I'm at 1,600. I'm going to be landing. I don't know where.
On the evening of March 4, 2024, a father, his wife, and their 3 children ages 12, 10, and 7 were less than 2 miles from a runway in Nashville, Tennessee. They'd been flying all day. 3 flights, 2 fuel stops, over 600 miles from home. They were minutes from being done. But they never landed. And the reason an entire family died that night comes down to something so small, so mechanical, so easy to get right that it makes the outcome almost impossible to accept. The Dotsenko family lived in King Township, a quiet community of about 27,000 people, roughly 50 kilometers north of Toronto. Victor Dotsenko was 43 years old. His wife, Rima, was 39. They had 3 children, David, who was 12, Adam, who was 10, and Emma, who was 7. All 3 children attended a private school called the UMCA Rich Tree Academy in nearby Vaughan. After the crash, the school's co-director described them as the sweetest kids you'll ever meet, bright, energy-filled, the kind of children who lit up the hallways. A neighbor would later call the Dotsenko simply a wonderful family. Victor earned his private pilot license in 2022 through the Brampton Flying Club. By the time of the accident, about a year and a half later, he had accumulated roughly 200 total flight hours. Of those, about 43 were in the airplane he'd be flying that night, a 1978 Piper PA-3 2RT 300T, known as the Turbo Lance II. He had no instrument rating. His documented night flying experience totaled 18.5 hours, and the trip he was about to take his family on would be, by far, the longest flight the airplane had made since the family registered it in Ontario the previous summer. On the morning of March 4th, Victor loaded his family into the Turbo Lance and departed from Brampton Caledon Airport in Ontario. Their destination was John C. Toone Airport in Nashville, Tennessee, roughly 600 nautical miles to the southwest. But the Turbo Lance couldn't make it on one tank, so Victor planned fuel stops along the way. The first leg took them to Erie, Pennsylvania, where he landed about an hour later and added 11 gallons to each wing tank. After a 90-minute stop, they took off again, this time flying south to Mount Sterling, Kentucky. There, he topped off with 52 gallons. The third and final leg, Mount Sterling to Nashville, was roughly 180 miles. Victor departed around 7. It was dusk. By the time they'd reach Nashville, it would be fully dark. He climbed to 10,500 feet and headed southwest under visual flight rules. No flight plan filed, no instrument approach planned. Just a VFR cross-country at night, with his wife and 3 children behind him. The flight to Nashville was uneventful. There were no reports of any mechanical problems. No irregularities communicated to air traffic control. The weather at Nashville was clear, 10 miles visibility, light winds from the southeast. A completely routine approach, until it wasn't. As Victor descended into the Nashville area, he was communicating with Nashville Approach, transitioning through the Class C airspace that surrounds Nashville International, on his way to the smaller John C. Toone Airport, just to the west. The approach controller handed him off to the tower at Toone. Victor checked in at 8 miles north, then again at 5 miles as instructed. He reported the runway in sight. The tower controller cleared him to land on runway 20, but Victor never read back the landing clearance, a small detail, but one that suggests he may have been managing a high workload in the cockpit. And then, the first sign something was wrong. His flight track was perfectly aligned with the runway centerline from 3 miles out. But when he reached 1 mile from the threshold, he was still at 2,500 feet, far too high to land. A normal approach would have him at roughly 300 to 400 feet above the ground at that distance. Instead of landing, Victor told the tower he wanted to overfly the field and come back around for runway 20. The controller didn't ask why. He couldn't. He had multiple inbound aircraft behind Victor. He simply told him to contact Nashville Departure and overfly the field. Now this is the critical moment. Why didn't Victor descend for landing? He was aligned. He was cleared. The weather was perfect. The NTSB could never determine the reason. But what we know is that somewhere during this approach, as he was running through his mental checklist, preparing to land, Victor reached for the fuel selector. The first item on the Piper Turbo Lance's approach and landing checklist reads, Fuel selector proper tank. The investigation would later find the fuel selector positioned between the off position and the left main tank, not fully seated in either detent. A position that would restrict fuel flow to less than what the engine needed to keep running. And Victor had no idea. As Victor overflew the airport at 2,500 feet, residential security cameras captured the sound of his engine. Audio analysis confirmed the engine was running at nearly full continuous power, about 2,650 revolutions per minute. Everything sounded normal. Then, at 19 hours, 41 minutes, and 37 seconds, the engine sound became abnormal. Several popping noises. And then silence. Victor had just contacted departure control, confused about who to talk to. He told the controller he was overflying the field at 2,500 feet and needed to come back to land. The controller told him to contact the tower. Victor replied that the tower had told him to call departure.
Foxtrot, Bravo, Whiskey, Hotel. Do you still have Johnstown Airport in sight? Army 20723, contact 2 Tower 19.
Nashville, I'm declaring emergency. My engine shut down.
The controller asked again if he was trying to land at Tune.
Charlie, Foxtrot, Bravo, Whiskey, Hotel. Are you trying to land at Johnstown?
My engine turned off. I'm at 1,600. I'm going to be landing. I don't know where.
Charlie, Foxtrot, Bravo, Whiskey, Hotel. I'm declaring an emergency. Do you have the airport in sight? Straight in runway 2. Straight in runway 2 at Johnstown. Do you have the airport?
Yes, I have the runway inside.
November 5 Alpha Tango, runway 2, clear to land.
I'm too far away, I won't make it.
Okay, Charlie Foxtrot, Bravo, Whiskey, Hotel. Charlie Foxtrot, Bravo, Whiskey, Hotel, approach you up. If you can glide in there, sir, if you can glide in, they're clearing the runway for you.
The airplane descended over a residential neighborhood on a heading of 080 degrees, passed over Interstate 40, struck the shoulder of the eastbound lanes, hit an embankment, and erupted in fire. The left fuel tank ruptured on impact. The post-impact fire consumed most of the left wing and the fuselage. Victor, Rima, David, Adam, and Emma, all 5 members of the Dotsenko family, were killed instantly. The Nashville Fire Department said the impact was catastrophic and did not leave any survivors. Investigators from the NTSB examined the investigators of Bagan's wreckage at a facility in Springfield, Tennessee. They found no mechanical failures, no engine anomalies. The crankshaft rotated freely with compression on all cylinders. Both magnetos produced spark. The turbocharger was intact. The propeller showed no signs of rotation at impact, confirming the engine had stopped producing power before the plane hit the ground. The fuel servo was sent to the manufacturer and tested. It operated within limits. There was nothing wrong with this airplane, except for one thing. The fuel selector valve was found between the off position and the left main tank. The internal ports were not open. Fuel could not flow to the engine in that position. The NTSB concluded that Victor likely moved the fuel selector during his approach following the checklist, but failed to fully seat the handle into the detent. A partial movement that felt like it was in position but wasn't. The restricted fuel flow wasn't enough to sustain engine power, and at 2,650 revolutions per minute, the engine consumed whatever fuel remained in the lines before starving completely. By the time Victor realized what was happening, he was south of the airport with no engine and not enough altitude to glide back to the runway. The NTSB's probable cause reads like a single sentence: the pilot's failure to ensure proper placement of the fuel selector during approach and landing, resulting in fuel starvation. But behind that sentence is a family that did everything right by conventional standards. They flew a well-maintained airplane. They stopped for fuel. They communicated with ATC. They flew in clear weather. And a father who was trying to get his family home made one small, incomplete movement of a lever in a cockpit where he had only 43 hours of experience. At night, managing the complexity of Nashville airspace with 18 hours of night flying in his entire logbook. The fuel selector on the Piper Turbo Lance sits low, between the seats. It requires a deliberate motion to lock into position. If you don't feel it click, you might not know it isn't seated, and by the time the engine tells you something is wrong, it may already be too late. David, Adam, and Emma, the 3 children who lit up the hallways of their school, never got to grow up, and the question this story leaves behind isn't just about a fuel selector. It's about how much we're willing to risk when we put the people we love most in the world into an airplane with us, and whether 200 hours of experience is enough to bring them home.